السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome guest. I'm Khalud Al-Naimi, the events manager at Ittihad Museum. Today we will be hosting the third talk of our program, entitled Stories in Image, Design and Illustration. This panel will be moderated by Azim Al Ghussein, with the speaker Dina Tawil, ومحمد Al Shaibani, and Sultan Al Ramahi. This event is a part of Contemporary History, a series of culture events commissioned by Dubai Culture Authority and Ittihad Museum, programmed by Al Advisory, running from October 2022 to June 2023. The cultural program, Contemporary History, features a series of museum films, complemented by a similar series of museum stock. Together, they invite an exploration of UAE history and culture through the voices of those who are imagining Emirati culture today. I will now hand over to Azim, who will be introduce the panel. Please silence your mobile devices. Enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Hello. Okay, great. Can everyone hear me? Wonderful. Welcome everyone to Stories and Images, Design and Illustration at Ittihad Museum. Our panel today is with visual storytellers who will be sharing insights into and discussing their diverse practices and processes. The roundtable guests with us today, as who were briefly introduced, Dina Tawil, Mohammed Al Shaibani, and Sultan Al Ramahi. Dina Tawil is a Lebanese designer and illustrator based in Dubai. She is a multimedia designer by training, an illustrator by passion, and currently works as a user experience and interface designer. She loves to work with her hands, whether it's making a website, drawing portraits, or planting tomatoes. In her free time, away from corporate hustle, she likes to take on creative projects and draw strangers in coffee shops. Mohammed Al Shaibani was born in Dubai and is currently a creative director of Sandstorm Comics. He's also an Emirati comic book artist. He received his Bachelor of Science in Graphic Design from the American University of Sharjah and his Master of Fine Arts in Sequential Art from the Savannah College of Art and Design. Mohammed resides in Dubai, where his drawing time is divided between finishing pages, publishing indie comics, and chasing his nieces for his materials. I'm sure that's more relatable for us than other people. Sultan Al Ramahi lived in Dubai until 1998, when he and his family moved to Singapore. He has since gone to study architecture at Washington State University before returning to Abu Dhabi and calling it home in 2013. A practicing illustrator, known for his dramatic illustrations of buildings in Abu Dhabi, Ramahi's illustrations share the stories of structures that are often part of daily lives of the residents of these cities, but for the most part taken for granted. And I am Azim Al Ghussein, the Library and Research Manager at Jameel Art Center, occasional cartoonist, illustrator, and printmaker, and I will also be moderating the session today. So now that we've gone through the very detailed and hopefully nuanced biographies of what you do and your practices, I think a good place to start most talks is at the very beginning. So I think I would like to start off by asking, what is the first story you remember, or when is the first time you recognized a story? And I'll call out to you, we can keep this very organic. Momo, I feel like you have something to say with that spark in your eye.
Okay, bear with me when I say this.
All right.
I was very, very young. I was 4 years old, and let's just say I was privy to an anime that's not meant for children. It was extremely violent. It had ideas I shouldn't have been exposed to, but it did grant me this access to visual storytelling in a way I've never ever seen before. And since then, I've been hooked.
I feel like that's very true. I can believe it. How about you, Dina?
I believe it too. For me, the first time I remember trying to tell a story, visually at least, was during one of my parents' trips. I think one of my parents was traveling, and he was coming back from Lebanon, and I was trying to draw the airport, trying to figure out where my dad was at the time, like by the time he'd reach home. And I remember just trying to visualize all that, and I must have been like 5 or 6 years old, and I didn't know what the airport really looked like, and it was just It was a struggle, to say the least, but it was a struggle that I was hooked to.
I mean, I really like that it's a very practical story. It's not like some grand dream, yeah.
Just trying to visualize Google Maps before Google Maps existed, maybe.
That's wonderful. Innovative, definitely. And Sultan?
Hello? There you go. And actually, it actually ties back to, I'm going to jump in, one of the books I bought, and people see it at the library later. But I think probably the best example of storytelling was, I was extremely obsessed with insects, animals, dinosaurs, these kind of things. And the way I had taught myself to kind of really draw, and how I remember it, was I would just open up these books of nature scenes, of animals, and I would copy every single page again and again and again. And it started from that, and it started again, and went into video games. I would imagine these video games and these battle scenes and violence and things like that, and I would just sit there copying these images, drawing them again and again. And I think that's where that kind of storytelling, because I would just imagine what was happening on this battlefield or in the forest, or this dinosaur eating this dinosaur. And it just kind of progressed from there, and then I think I really learned how to sketch and illustrate from them.
Wow, so you made a career out of it.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm actually curious to also hear if there were any moments when you thought of this as a relevant profession, if it's a choice that you made at some point in your career, like, this is what I want to do, and this is how I'm going to do it.
Okay, let's see. Everyone essentially loves watching their work move, and I thought for the longest time that I wanted my profession to be into animation, something that is iterative, and then you do it, 24 images, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't have the attention span for it, to be very frank. And there was a moment in my third year in undergrad, and it was so oblivious to me. I loved comics, I loved reading comics, and I was obsessed with them. In relation to video games, I may out myself as saying I have like 250 issues of Sonic the Hedgehog comics in my house. But I hide them in the back so that no one sees them. No one can see my true form. But a professor led me to it. I thought I wanted to be an animator, and then the professor was like, "You love comics, and who doesn't want to see their images in motion? But if you don't feel like you're enticed to follow that path, you can just do comics."
Where did the hesitancy come from?
I couldn't see it. It was like forest for the trees. I don't understand why.
All right, good to know. So it's kind of something that you just didn't see all the signs pointing to.
I mean, if you show a child an R-rated anime, clearly the anime is what they're thinking about. It's just like repeated images, and I thought it was wonderful to see the figures in motion, and I really wanted that. But you can achieve almost the same thing in comics. It's still a figure in motion.
Just takes less people. Yeah. How about you, Dina?
So I didn't really realize that you could make a career out of, let's say, illustration or art up until I was looking for majors. And I realized I studied in the American University of Sharjah. And while I was looking through programs that might look like a good fit, I fell upon multimedia design, which basically encapsulated all the things that I was interested in up until that point. I was around 15, 16. Included illustration, animation, web design, motion graphics, and filmmaking. I was like, yeah, that sounds so fun. And after that, that's when I started to realize that, yeah, this is a field that one can, put their time and effort into, and get something back. Because up until that point, like all my family, they're all like practical people. They're either in IT or in chemistry or business. So yeah, no one touched upon the creative field.
So it sounds like you kind of got into a general creative field, and through which you kind of explore different facets of?
Yes, I would say we absolutely did that during university. Even now, I mean, I work as a UX UI designer. That's mostly web design, user research. And then I try to take on creative projects on the side, something more illustration-based, just to satisfy that, need to work with your hands.
All right. And Sultan?
Yeah. So I went to university to study architecture, and I think coming up to architecture, it was, can I go into the arts? And to be fair, I asked my parents later, I said, if I had gone into the arts, would you have been okay with it? They said, meh, maybe. We would have probably been. But I think I put a lot of pressure on myself and said, maybe arts isn't the right path to take, and I went into architecture. And what happened was, when I went into architecture, I just started taking these sneaky classes of art. And eventually, by the fourth year, they said, you have enough classes to become an artist. So I have a double major in architecture and fine arts. But when I came back here, I was in the planning council in Abu Dhabi, which was way more kind of technical, but eventually I just realized I was bringing all these artistic abilities and illustration into work and somehow. And just to give an example, I work in design management in a big development company in Abu Dhabi. We're doing all these cool projects. But because they knew my background in art, we had this big art strategy, and they're like, oh, you know how to draw? You take care of it. It's yours now. But I think it's interesting because I didn't go down that path of I'm going to become an illustrator and do this, but these elements have been really kind of a big part of everything I do in work now, in my career, and they've been a really big help as well.
So the next question just kind of happens naturally after that. Where do you find storytelling happening around you outside of yourself in your city or in your environment?
Actually, it's a great question because I'm sorry to say this, but a lot of times people say Abu Dhabi is a bit boring, it's a bit dry, it's a bit bland. But I think one thing happened where because I came back from university, I barely recognized Abu Dhabi. I left Abu Dhabi when I was 7. I came back when I was 21 or 23. So the city had changed so much. I would come in the winter and summer because of that job or university. And what happened was I would just go out and explore the city. I still loved architecture, so I would go out and explore and walk around, which we don't do anymore. No one really walks around. Even in Dubai, you take your car, you go to a specific area, you walk around there and you go. And it was just about walking. And in this place, I found so many stories, so many things happening. And I found the humor. I think a lot of my work, I try to bring a lot of humor that I see in Abu Dhabi, things that I'm making fun of, things that, it's inside jokes. If you lived in the UAE for your whole life, you get. And I think just looking at the city, walking through it, experiencing the city as much as possible, its sights, its smells, its people, the weird things you think, like, what is happening here? Why is this located? Why does this building look like this? These things you don't really realize, but start to form, the way you sketch, the way you illustrate, the way your creative output comes out.
So they're kind of like these very organic things happening all around you.
Exactly.
All right, on the street.
Exactly.
And that's the important part.
And anything, we have our phones now, just something on the street is like, oh, that's funny, take a picture.
Okay.
And I just, another day I might be sketching and I'm like, I can't think of anything. You put out this picture, I'm like, this is so weird. I like this. I'm going to draw this.
That's good. That's good. Dina, how about you? Where do you find storytelling happening around you in your environment?
I would say that is a question that has plagued artists for years and years. For me, I try to emulate everyday moments that bring me joy, whether it's a moment of peace or a moment of inspiration or, I don't know, just spending quality time with family or something like that. I try to emulate these moments that I look for, that I miss, I suppose.
So can I just ask to expand on that? Is it through people or objects, any specific places?
I would say it's people. I find it hard to draw spaces convincingly, but people I really enjoy drawing. I have been in one or two situations where I'd be on the street and I'd see a person with a very interesting face and I would just wish that I had the courage to just go up and say, can I take a picture of you? I'd love to draw you later. Maybe one day I will.
That's actually really sweet, I have to say. And Mohammed?
For me, my ethos is a bit different. There's two parts to this question. My ethos always comes from the form of storytelling is one of those instinctive, primal things people do in terms of like sitting around the fire and telling legends and telling stories and throwing their subconscious onto the stars and constellations and coming up with all these ideas. And so like, I think of storytelling, for me personally, it always comes about asking anyone about what they did last weekend. They'll tell you a story. Just take any random person and tell me, hey, what did you do? What did you do yesterday? They'll give you a beginning, middle, and end. And I think that's always inspirational to me in that sense that, any person can have a solid structure to this. And the second part of the answer as well, like what I do is I also believe, again, people you're going to find out, I'm like actually a lot more boring than I sound. No, I believe in a very structured and rigid approach to story as well. So for example, Stephen King would talk about a Darwinian idea of storytelling. If you have an idea or a story, don't write it down and see if you remember it months and months down the line. And I kind of practice that, and I'll very like consciously try to practice that. Oh, I have an idea for a story. I'll leave it. I'll drop it. Weeks later, is it still there? Yeah, I can use this.
I mean, I really liked it because it's so specific. While you were talking, there was actually that image of one of your works. And I was thinking of how, while you talked about conversations and thinking about the basics of a story, a lot of the ways in which you work don't seem very familiar to the average human experience. You create such expressive, dynamic, energetic visual stories. I've been lucky enough to be included in publications with all of you, actually, but with you, a lot more. And I've seen a lot of these works, and I was wondering what happens between the conversation that you have that's inspiring of a story and this work that comes out on paper.
A lot of iterative work. I will pick a project or a story, right? And then I will go and research what is the theme or what is the feel of the story. And then I just drown myself in all sorts of material, in music and soundtrack that fits the horror genre if I'm making a horror comic. All the horror artists, I'd look at everything I can get my hands on, and it has to have ink. It has to, if I'm not 5 Candoras in ink by the end of the project, it's not a project. Like, this has to happen. I have to be bathed in ink at this point in time. But there's something that happens when I'm working, and I'm gonna borrow some words here. It kind of leads me to the revelation of my ignorance about the material. There's so much I don't know about it, and then I try to take it and do stuff, and accidents happen, and I'm like, okay, that's awesome, that's a great effect, I need to replicate this. How am I going to do that? And eventually, after sweat, blood, and tears, and a lot of ink, irreparable damage to tables, irreparable damage to floors, carpets are gone, chairs are done, then something comes out.
All right, so it's a material exploration.
Yeah, but there's also a narrative aspect to it.
Of course. I mean, but the ink-stained Candoras would say otherwise.
I've got 5.
And Dina, you work very differently, I think. Your drawings are the illustrations that I've seen of your work, and even the stories that we've also seen in the publication we were talking about is Corniche, and at some point all of us have been in it. So familiar with the work in that sense. The way you depict your images is very different from Momo's, and actually in many ways visually very reflective of these interactions or moments that you see people. So how does that translate from a real experience into one that you share with others through illustration?
So I would say my process, even though I don't get as much clothes stained as Momo does, I do enjoy working in a sketchbook first or on a piece of paper. I love the feel of pencil or ink on a paper. There's nothing like it. I don't think any iPad could replicate that.
Amen.
There's something just very satisfying about not even having to calibrate, just where the point's gonna hit, what the line's gonna look like. I like that predictability. It's refreshing. But I do prefer to afterwards just scan it and work digitally, just because if I'm doing something for a client, then there might be many revisions, lots of color changes. That's not something I want to do on a piece of paper. I don't like to redraw, because you just lose something every time you try and ink a sketch or redraw an illustration. It just loses some of its energy that you had in that initial drawing. So yeah, that's the reason I prefer to work digitally. It's also much more portable, much more scalable, and just more practical in that sense. But I will always go sketchbook first. Like I have a growing collection now. I think I've hit my 48th sketchbook that I've been keeping count since, I want to say, 2011. So yeah.
Yeah.
And it's really nice just to flip through the first one and then the last one and see how much you've grown over the past many years.
I really appreciate the fact that you sometimes condense them into these like zine formats that people can access, so you get to share the story of not just one sketchbook but multiple.
Many.
Yeah, it's actually really nice from a perspective of someone else who's interested in visual storytelling to see someone else's development and how they work.
I'm glad to hear, because I'm a big fan of collecting other people's sketchbooks. I have like a bunch of those, compilations that include so many artists, like selected sketchbooks and stuff, and I I find them so refreshing. It's just so nice to see like someone's raw thoughts just to put on paper and visualize. You know, not refined, not cleaned up, just pure raw thoughts.
And then finding the thread that connects them all at the very end. Yeah. And Sultan, you actually work on a lot of paper as well, but not necessarily sketchbooks. Could you tell us a little bit about why that choice is, first of all? It's very strange to draw something on the bill from a restaurant or a discarded napkin.
So I used to draw a lot on sketchbooks. I still have all my old sketchbooks. For some reason, when I travel, I try to keep a sketchbook with me, but my scale has just gone down and down. When I go and travel, it becomes smaller and smaller. So a book is this big, it's like a tiny piece right in the middle, hyper detailed of something. But I just realized that it's, it just gets harder and harder to, especially in work, to kind of keep up with the sketchbook and be consistent. And so my sketches have just become everywhere. I do not condone this. I will sketch on walls, I will sketch on tables. Yeah. I'm an adult man right now. I'm not in school anymore, but it just still happens. On mawaqif bills, I would tag them for them to pay my mawaqif bills. They never did, unfortunately. On restaurant bills, and I have hundreds and hundreds of post-it notes. I have this issue at work that if I'm not sketching or my hand is not moving, I can't focus. And I know everyone has their way to focus, in meetings. Mine is, when I'm looking and talking, my right hand is just there. And instead of keeping it, I will just take it and just give it to the person, just some random person. And I'm notorious of giving away most of my art, which is not a good thing, but it's also not a bad thing. But I just feel like in these moments where you get these random pieces of paper, because obviously everything is becoming digital now, I'm always getting bombarded by fines and papers and this, and it just becomes a habit of sketching. And what's crazy about these sketches is that a lot of these first ideas, become my sketches later on. I will sit there, and if it's in a meeting or I see something on the computer screen or this, I'll do the initial sketch, tiny one. And then next day I'll draw it again. The next day I'll draw it again. Next day I'll draw it again. And then I'll throw them, if I've kept a few, and say maybe this might be something cool. I throw it in the drawer, and then maybe 5 months online, I'm out of ideas. What did I sketch 5 months ago? Okay, I'll sketch that. And expand on it and create a world and the lore and what's happening in the background. And yeah, so hands up.
That's actually that's pretty incredible. You've kind of talked us through your tools, your materials, and how the process starts. I think that it's also really great to understand how a typical timeline of how you kind of start a project when you know a project starts and how you get into it. It's different from every single person, and all three of you have such different ways of working. You kind of suggested some of these parts, but they're kind of more loosely tied to your creative practice. What does it look like when you're sitting down, you have this project? How do you know what the story is? How do you know where it starts? How do you know when it ends? I think maybe we start with Dina this time.
Call me off guard. So I guess it depends. It varies whether if it's something I'm doing just for myself or if it's something that I'm doing for as a commission. When I'm working on like a personal piece of illustration, what usually happens is I just tend to keep my sketchbook around at home and I doodle if I'm watching TV or if I'm spending time with family. My hand just likes to, as you said, move. And then every once in a while, I just go back and revisit older sketchbooks, and I find an idea that was this could really grow into something more interesting. It might resonate with someone else, not just me. And then I try and expand on that. I scan them, clean them up, and try to create a nicely colored digital illustration. When it comes to client work, it's more direct. I guess it's more planned. It's create a few versions of sketches, generate a few, try to see which one works best, which one emulates the idea best. Maybe share it with a couple of people, get some responses, see what they feel.
Responses.
Yeah. And then work off of there.
Do you consider the audience when you're planning this, or these people with the responses, are they specific people?
So, for example, I worked on a children's book a few years ago, and feedback is necessary just to see if the idea communicates, if I am visualizing the text in the best way I could be visualizing it in that regard. When you're trying to communicate a message or a story, you want to see that the story communicates well.
Okay, but it communicates well to
The target audience.
Okay. Okay. No, it's not a quiz. I was just making sure. How about you, Momo? Sorry, Mohammed.
A for effort. Well, let's see. I like to do anthology projects, and the particular one that I really enjoy doing is Corniche. And so there's always limits. Whenever I approach a project, there's limits, there's set limits. And it's always about, okay, I'm approaching this project, what am I trying to learn or what am I trying to test out? And every Corniche project, which is why I love Corniche, it's an opportunity to test myself against something that's like a square format. It's 6 pages. I know where I'm going to start, I know where I'm going to end. Then the genre comes in. What am I looking at? Am I looking at manga? Am I looking at some bande dessinée? Am I looking at some weird Argentinian artist? Am I looking at some random Italian artist? Am I looking at, American comics at the time? That's when the concept comes in. And then I try to get to the heart of it. So, okay, fine. This, I've decided, is going to be French. It's going to be this particular artist called Herman, for example. What is he like doing? Oh, he has a story called Les Tours de Bois-Maury, and it's like about towers and kings and knights. All right, that's an idea. I'm going to make a story about knights. All right, talk to people. Hey, I'm going to make a story about knights. Look at this book. Does this look nice? Do you think I can do this? Blah, blah, blah. Get some, sample. And then someone was going to say something, and it's always about a joke. It's eventually just always about a joke. I'll crack a joke about something, and I'm like, haha, this is it. And then I try to mix that into my storytelling. And of course, I have an ideal, an ideal person whom usually I would show the work to. I always have the same person I go to, someone I trust, someone I know who knows a lot more than I do, who's experienced in a lot of the visual storytelling, who has an eye for this thing. I will do all my thumbnails, and then I'll send it to him. And then he'll send me draw-overs with paragraphs of critique. Like, I'm talking paragraphs, pages and pages of paragraphs and draw-overs. He'll draw over my work. And it'll be like, no, the arm doesn't do this. No, you can't draw it like that. No, they're sliding off the panel. No, this is wrong. You can't exaggerate it this way. And after that, I take all those notes, and I sit back, and then I do the thing digitally first, because there are perspective tools that allow me to work. I'm very organized in that stuff. I really believe in craft. I really believe in honing the tools that make me be a better artist. So figure drawing is always important to me. Perspective is always important to me. Reference is always important to me. The style reference is important to me. Backgrounds, all that stuff is hugely referenced. After that, okay, we're clear. We have pencils. I print them on blue line, preferably A3. The bigger it is, the easier it is to move your arm. Like, you'll save your wrist if you use your shoulders. I promise, it's a good habit. And so that's when...
My eyes are getting weaker every day, by the way.
And that's when I am, like I said, I'm an ink fiend. I'm addicted to the ink stuff. I'm not kidding. That's when it happens. I will warm up for 20, 30 minutes, sometimes an hour, using a brush or using a pen. And it's always with ink. And I'll hit the pages. There's always a practice page, because God knows it's going to go wrong. I'm going to pull a line, it's going to go wrong, or that one time I inked 90% of a page, and then because, of course, your ink fiends have their inkwells next to them, poop, spilled on the entire page. Page done. 4 hours out the window. Print it again, restart.
So it feels like you actually make your comics for yourself. You're using this as an opportunity to practice. I've never seen someone so excited about ruining a page only to start again and get better at it.
I could do it better. That's always that's always my belief. I can do this better. And then when I'm done, I'm usually finished when I seriously hate myself. When I'm like, okay, no, I can't stand myself. I can't stand this line work. I can't stand this. All right, I'll put this in a drawer. Oh no, I have to scan it and send it by mail. Okay, now I can put it in a drawer. I've now taken to hand lettering. Like, I letter all my comics using the same type, and then it all comes out blue, right? And so, like, I hand letter.
So just to elaborate on what hand lettering is.
So the bubbles in the comic are the dialogue balloons or the captions that describe the scene or characters who are speaking. That's called lettering. And so I would type that up using a particular font that I like, and they're not like the basic types. I actually look through and find typefaces that I like. I'll print that with the blue line. So I letter everything and pencil everything, print that out as one thing, and then I will ink everything, and then I'll grab one pen and just letter slowly and go through it.
Your appreciation for craft and choosing to do it the hard way when there is an easy option is actually, I think, reflects a lot of what your practice is and what you're interested in doing and why you're interested in doing it.
Let me tell you one more thing. If I really hate myself, I will literally ink the borders of my page freehand without a ruler.
It's very interesting. And we need to talk more after this. Sultan, what does your journey look like when you go from on a project?
A lot to follow up to, Mohammed. I think one thing I can say about my practice, it's been very inconsistent, and I have to be realistic with myself. I think the most I've ever done work and consistently finished on time, and this was for myself, was during COVID. During those lockdown days, in the Abu Dhabi lockdown days, I know Dubai didn't really have much. Abu Dhabi, we were complete lockdown. That was probably my most creative, I'd say, moment, because there was no distractions. There was no one, and I made this art just for myself. And it was, 2 days to a week of just sketching everything down on a piece of paper, on a post-it note, drawing it. And I think just to torture myself again, I would draw it again completely on the iPad after finishing the whole drawing. And I think I did that to all my drawings. I actually enjoyed, and I found it's actually quite a nice way of relaxation and therapy. When I have no mental capacity to think about something new, I will go over all my old drawings again on the iPad just to pass the time. It's actually a really amazing feeling. I highly recommend it. But of course, you mentioned that if it's through a client, it's going to be really quick. But I think for myself, I tend to just take my time, because I think right now art is becoming more and more less about a career option and more about just a personal preference of mine. When everything is just crazy, this art becomes much more of a calmness and sitting at home in quiet with music in that mood and just sketching, putting your hand on the paper and drawing. I hope to one day to come back to maybe a more professional way, and I think last year was maybe a bit better, because last year actually I did 2 murals. I did a lot more of art, and I found out I really enjoy murals, and I feel like this is something I would love to do for the rest of my life. But I think now with art, it's more about I'm finding the time for myself, using this as a way to process, I don't know, your emotions, your stress, just on a piece of paper. So it's just consistent at this point.
But it is a practice.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
More than it is kind of like a money-making thing.
True.
The idea is that you do it like even irregularly, I guess, in your case, and that still makes it a very important process for you, regardless of who's looking at it.
True.
But I'm really interested to hear more on, specifically, you were talking about focus and being able to make work. It's hard to find kind of the spaces or the time where that can happen. And you spoke about lockdown so specifically.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you've found, and this is once again, like I'm hoping to hear something that I could learn from, about places or spaces or platforms or programs that exist here where you found support besides the apartment and during lockdown.
YouTube.
YouTube. Okay, awesome.
There's a lot more. I think YouTube is probably well known. It's probably the best teacher, the best free teacher out there is YouTube. Anything you need, it's amazing. But I think with programs and things like that, I think obviously surrounding yourself with creative friends always helps. Surrounding yourself with non-creative friends always helps as well. Because when you're with your same group of people, the same likes and dislikes and everything, and generally you start to become kind of a bubble. But I think I have different friends groups, so I have some people, when I throw ideas at them, they're like, wow, or like, that's kind of stupid, or I don't get it, and this. So I think that kind of comes back to, okay, you know what, I'm going to change my thought process on this. I don't know, with programs and stuff, I think with Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and especially the last few years, we've seen a lot more kind of increase in programs and help. I don't know for Dubai, but Abu Dhabi, there's a lot more kind of online programs, especially during COVID, but also with Warehouse, and we have the Miza, and we have all the museums coming up soon. So there's a lot more focus. And Culture Foundation, which, if anyone knows Culture Foundation, Abu Dhabi is an integral part of that city's art and culture. And it's where I also grew up as a child, sketching. And I'm always so happy seeing that building completely reopened, because it's such a good resource for everyone in the city. But I think for me, I'm not sure, Azim, like programs, like things that help me with my practice, or I'm trying to think of.
You covered quite a broad
okay.
range. That was awesome.
Okay.
Also, the Cultural Foundation is such an important space. It was also the first time I feel like I recognized storytelling.
Yeah.
Here, and it was also in the 90s very diverse in its kind of programming that now we are lucky and we can walk around and kind of notice it happening everywhere. But yeah, back then it was really special.
It was groundbreaking for Abu
Yeah.
Dhabi back in the day, and obviously the day it closed down, it was extremely sad. And I know I have a very strong connection to it. My uncle is an architect and artist, and I grew up looking to that. And he would take us, the whole family, to the Culture Foundation for shows. So just seeing that place, which is, we don't think about it, but that specific place was, I think, the starting point for so many people in Abu Dhabi, because there was nothing else. So this was a starting point in libraries, it's the starting point for art, for theater. It all started in this one place, and I think seeing that now and heavily programmed and getting people back in, it's been really great.
Yeah, it really is. It's also kind of really great to see that now there's so many people who see the direct impact of this place, and what it means in terms of the support they receive from it. How about you, Dina? So the original question was the question is, what are other kinds of programs or what kinds of programs, support systems, platforms do you find allow you to practice storytelling or give you any other kind of support in storytelling?
So I would say it would be my community, both in terms of friendships, people at work who always encourage me to, who ask me, oh, what are you working on now? I'm sure you're working on something, which if I'm not working on something, makes me really want to work on something. As well as I would say, Instagram community that has naturally come out. I've been following these guys for a few years before we actually met, which is, always great, to meet people you're friends with online, people whose work you support and who support you back, and then you get the chance to meet them. When I was younger, I would say Comic-Con was a big influence, or a big something I would always look forward to. I had attended maybe the first 5 or 6, all the ones up until COVID, I would say. And I exhibited a few times as well, and it was always just something that would get me pumped. I feel like I have a deadline. I have a year to create a lot of new work. Something to showcase, something to build relationships with, and it never fails. Having a deadline never fails.
No, it doesn't. It's actually the best kind of fire to be right over, right?
Absolutely, because sometimes if I'm left to my own devices, I might just have the ideas percolate, but never actually visualize them. Another motivation for me this year was Corniche. It was the first year I've actually taken part of it. For those who don't know, Corniche is an anthology. It's a collection of comics by different artists here in the country, and it's all printed in one book where each artist gets 6 pages. And it was my first time trying to work in a comic format, and it really makes you think differently of how to tell a story and how to visualize your narrative, your thoughts.
I wouldn't have guessed that. You seem like it was the 100th.
Thank you. It was an idea that was in my head for a few years before I actually sat down and visualized it. So
I mean, it's actually really interesting that you say that. I feel like if someone had been looking at your work before, there are all these visual elements that we've seen before in your practice. So it does feel like something that's been fermenting for a really long time. Or pickling, however.
Pickling.
Yeah. And Mohammed?
You're making me confess to so many things right now. All right. Truthfully speaking, and this is going to sound so random, one of the things that kept me going through the lockdown, Street Fighter tournaments.
All right.
No joke. I'd put professional esports Street Fighter tournaments, like Japan or America, because they all went online. So I'd watch those, or I'd watch previous matches as I draw. So all I wanted to do was, all right, we're locked in. We have nothing to do, right? Oh, I just so happen to be a person who buys a ton of comics and a ton of books. Go through the books, go through the comics. Some comics I draw panel by panel, redraw, learn how they're doing, like the expressions or the figure or the perspective. And my life with comics is very rigid. It's essentially practice until I drop dead. So that's what kept me going through COVID, is just reading a ton of books about drawing, watching YouTube videos that are instructional videos on like boring stuff, but this is how you draw the brachialis. This is how it connects to your bone. This is how the other muscles connect to these muscles. Again and again and again. And I think I made it I think I made most of the upper body. I can name most of the muscles in the upper body. I haven't got into the legs yet. The thigh muscles and the legs are extremely complicated.
Would it be safe to say that a medical library might be the best place for support for you?
A mental institution first.
All right, this is the wild card question that we didn't discuss as we prepare for things like this, but what is your dream project? And I know it's a cheesy question, but I actually think how each of you will answer this will kind of show the diversity of what is actually happening with visual storytellers here today. So let's start with you, Mohammed. Sorry.
A for effort. My dream project. I'm writing it right now. I can't talk about it.
Okay.
But no, I'm serious. I'm serious. Like I can't talk about it because the idea has been this is one of those ideas where it's like one of those inspirational shower moments where you trip, hit your head, and then you're like, I'm dreaming. Oh no, this is an idea. And so I have the idea, I've done it, and all the work I'm doing right now in terms of making comics is just practice for that one comic. I'm writing ideas slowly, I'm doing the research slowly, but I want my skill to be commensurate to the idea.
So what's the format it takes? Give us something.
Give you something?
Yes,
it's going to be 8 issues. It's going to be 48 pages each issue.
Okay.
I have the format kind of identified. It's about, there's a protagonist. He goes on a journey. He faces challenges. And then he comes out on top. Or maybe he doesn't.
So it's a comic in multiple issues.
Yeah.
Okay. You don't need to share more than that. I just want to know what.
Look, I'm literally working on it. Like, even if I wanted to share something, I have nothing. Like I have random disparate notes. Like when you see like a serial killer's basement of like maps and notes. That's like my house right now.
I wouldn't have expected any less. Sultan?
Ooh, this is a tough question. I was thinking the whole time, like, what should I say? What should I say when it comes to me? There's a few ideas. I'm sorry, I'm going to cheat. There's not one project. There's a few in my mind that have been in the back of my head for the last few years. There's one, it's a drawing club. It sounds very boring. It sounds very, usual. But I'm working on how can I make this club as weird and strange and captivating as possible. And it's been in the back of my head, and I feel like the day I just quit everything and become a full-time artist, I'm going to start this club. I'll invite you guys, don't worry. And then the next one is, I think, weirdly enough, like a children's animal book. I think it's just been in the back of my mind for a while. I think that would be much more of a passion project and something for myself and the target audience.
Like a book to teach children about animals.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's either like a crazy drawing club or this, or a giant mural somewhere in Abu Dhabi again.
Okay, I like it. It also relates to the first question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Okay.
Fingers crossed.
Dina.
So I also do not have one project. I actually have a sticky note with like a bunch of projects that I'd like to one day be able to work on. I'd like to work on a mural someday, something that expands like a large wall that tells a story. I usually draw a very small scale, either A5 sketchbooks or sticky notes. So to draw on something big or to visualize something that large is going to be a nice challenge. I also would like to do more like app illustration work, because I currently design the interface and usually devoid of illustrations. There's either an illustration department that takes care of it, or no illustrations for that matter. So I'd like to be able to work on something that's interactive, with the nice parallax effect, so that like you scroll and you see different elements interacting with one another, or some sort of story, like children's book that is also clickable, like these iPad ones where you click and you can read the story, you can hear the story, you can interact with different elements. I think that brings it to life in a way 2D illustration currently doesn't.
Thank you. That was actually very specific.
Yeah. I've given it some thought.
Yeah, clearly. All right. I think this just one more question before we open it up for the audience. What's next for you in your careers? So this is unlike the dream project. This is very real right now. Let's start with Dina, just so we can keep you guessing who's going to go next.
So there's a project that has that has been percolating for a few years now that I'm hoping to actually commit to this year. For a while now, I've been collecting Arabic sayings or proverbs, because I like how visual they are, how metaphorical they are, and how they can, lend to be visualized in a non-conventional way. I have over 100, and I'm hoping to sit down and like start illustrating them, like create a collection, either posters or something that can fit into a book or something like that.
A book for you.
Then we'll talk after this.
Sultan?
So what's next in my career?
As you move forward.
As I move forward.
Yes.
I think for now, really, there's been a lot of projects, I think, that I've been invited to kind of help or work on this year. And I think I'm trying to be more proactive and actually joining them and actually doing something this year. And I think if Corniche comes again this year, I would love to participate. I think that'd be great. I'm hoping another mural. We'll see if that happens. But I think maybe on a interesting enough on a professional level, I think I brought it up in the beginning, is that in my actual career right now, they're looking to me to do the art strategy and things like that. And maybe that's not really my own practice, but my own practice is kind of melding into my actual career, where I brought it up earlier that Yas Bay on Yas Island, all of these art projects and sculptures that are coming up, it's me and another team that we're strategizing and finding artists and looking for artists, looking for new styles. And I feel like that's kind of, I'd say, where my career is going in a professional way. But I think on my own practice, I'm excited for this year because I have a lot of stuff coming up, but I can't say what yet.
Okay.
Because I don't know.
I feel like everyone has these top secret things.
It's not a top secret.
Yeah.
I literally don't know.
Top secret just sounds like a cooler answer.
It's a good film.
Yeah. So how about you, Mohammed?
In my professional career as creative director of comics, for the next year, for this year, I'm just hoping the books that we're producing come out as part of Sandstorm. And probably it will kill me, but they'll be out by the end of the year. For my own personal growth, I'm starting another figure drawing mentorship. I've already finished one. I'm starting another figure drawing mentorship where, again, I will go sit and learn about muscle groups for fun. And hopefully join Corniche again. And there's something coming up that I'm hoping to join as well, also comic related. And just, again, the project that I need to do, I need to be so much better than I am right now. I need to be so much better than I am right now. So I just have to hit the desk. It's end of the day. It's just time on the drawing table. You only get better by doing it again and again.
If it's any consolation, I do believe that you are very good at what you do right now. And with your high standards, it'll be very difficult to ever get to a point where you feel like it's perfect. 5 Candoras per project. All right, thank you so much. Those are my questions, but we're going to open it up to the audience for a few questions. So I guess if you want to ask a question, we'll give you the mic.
Thank you. I'd be interested if you incorporate any, or if you experimented with AI technology. And I know everybody's talking about ChatGPT, etc. And if you started maybe to try to draw some inspiration out of that.
It is a useful way to sketch without sketching, I'll tell you that. I have tried it, but not extensively.
I mean, there are some really crazy ideas coming out of it if you give it the right prompts. So I was wondering if it might be helpful somehow to incorporate into storytelling.
I can give an example, I'd say maybe not in my own practice, but actually at work, when we do a lot of ideating and coming up with ideas, and before we'd actually have to sketch it on a piece of paper or iPad. Sometimes, obviously with the AI programs, it helps visualize the story and gets that picture out as clearly as possible, as quickly as possible. I'd say in my practice, I think just because everything I'm using is so tech, that I'm trying to actually, in my own practice, become a bit more low tech, because it just feels better, we're talking about just hand on paper. Because everything we do now is on iPad, Procreate, laptops, computers, and I feel like I'm regressing in my regular practice to become more low tech, but I think with career, we're using that way more and more.
I remain agnostic on the topic. I don't have time to try AI art. I really don't. I can barely do my job and draw.
I think it's really interesting when you're thinking about AI and innovation. It actually relies a lot on things that already exist in slightly unfamiliar combinations. So it's a wonderful tool, I think, but I really appreciate what you were saying, Sultan, earlier, and actually all three of you. At certain points, Dina and Mohammed, you also mentioned that there's this point of how you start and gets messy, and there's something about the human experience through the actual body in making something that is, I think, not replicatable just yet. It can only be replicated as data and like studying many things and kind of figuring out a formula, but each individual one is so unique, and it would be very difficult to kind of have an AI replicate what happens at hand, but it does make certain processes faster, and maybe client work or professional work that in an urban city like the UAE right now, and I think all of you also touched on this briefly, makes it so that you do sometimes need quick solutions, and that's what the client wants. So yeah, we pick when we do the thing the way we like and when we do it the fastest way.
Hi. This is a question for all three of you. All three of you are so diverse in your work, and it's incredibly beautiful. I just wanted to know, like, as artists, you have the tendency to see things that others don't. And I wanted to know, what is a certain message or target that you want to put into your work as an awareness that you feel you always go back to, a message in your storytelling?
I think, and maybe I didn't touch on this earlier, I think for me, I wouldn't say I have a specific message, but I think, and some of these aren't, if you go on our Instagram pages, you can see obviously all the rest of our work. One of the things I love to do is I like to create a full enveloped world and a lot of detail. And it's hard to explain it right now, but if you zoom in on some of these pictures, every corner has a little story. Every corner has a little thing, and I feel like I love those little details, those little story moments that you can find in that storytelling picture. You zoom in the picture, every book has a name, has a title. Every corner has, there's a cat, there's some dust, there's some insects, there's some posters. For me, I don't know if there's a purpose, but I love giving that storytelling experience, because storytelling is you envelop the viewer in a story. You give them this ideal, picture of something. And I love doing that in the small details in my practice. Yeah.
For me, I would say the message that I try to import is, one, a love for nature, because it's something that I only realize really fuels me, just to, be outside an urban setting every once in a while. It's really refreshing, and I think more people would benefit to just take a walk more often, or just to smell some clean, fresh air. Another one would be just to enjoy the simple moments in life, because you don't need that much to be happy.
Well, again, at the risk of sounding obtuse, I don't know what my theme is until the second draft. True story. My first draft is always about the images I have and the characters, right? And so as I go through as I go through my second draft, I start to notice there are recurring images, like rhythms that form with character decisions or with something, and I'm like, okay, I can polish that, and then eventually the theme becomes transparent. Like, I do believe when you are writing, when you do most things, especially if you're writing stories, the first draft is just subconscious on paper. So you're conscious about your choices in terms of, like, okay, the character's going to do this is an obstacle, and you take over that. But a lot of the subconscious bleeds through that initial writing. Once you go in the second draft and the third draft, you start noticing patterns, and you start picking them apart or highlighting them, bringing them bringing them to the foreground. And that's how I discover theme. Sometimes it's just like, oh, this was a humanist theme, or sometimes it's like, okay, this is about like a brother's journey, or sometimes it's about, well, don't let a demon cowboy kill people in a bar.
Hi, I think one of you spoke about surrounding yourself with non-artists. I bet the non-artists that you surround yourself with have a lot of questions about your artwork. I paint myself, and I've received multiple questions about my paintings. How would you, answer the multiple questions that you would receive from the non-artists?
The easiest thing to say is you just don't get it if you just don't want to deal with them. Because sometimes after a while the questions keep like I think like what was your inspiration? What are you trying to do this? And sometimes it gets a bit tiresome. So sometimes you just gotta play that card. But I think sometimes if you are with non-artist friends, I think it's also the way you think, and the way you think is just sometimes different. Your left side, right side of the brain, you're more analytical, you're more creative. And I think sometimes for them, it's easy just to explain to them what your thought process is. Because I have a lot of friends, some of them are in finance or business. It's a complete different. When they talk to me about finance, I shut my brain down. It's important, but when I try to explain to them, I think maybe that's what they're hearing. They're just probably shutting their brain down because I'm like blah 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 blah. But I think for you, I think it's just put yourself in their shoes and explain to them. I think the most important thing is be passionate when you explain it. No matter what, if you're talking garbage, like nothing, if they see your eyes light up and you're passionate and you're just explaining this, no matter what, the other person is gonna get sucked into your world and be like, oh, okay, I see it, or I understand, or I can see what's happening here, I can see what's happening in this piece. So I don't know if that helps a little bit, but I think really just be passionate about this. Don't get too much the details. Just show how much you love this. This is your life, this is your creativity, this is your emotions onto a piece of paper. And, just tell them like, sorry, you don't get it, and just walk away.
So for me, I find it refreshing to have a very different point of view sometimes because I tend to get lost in very minor details that other people might not notice, like, oh, the fingers look wonky, or one leg is longer than the other. How do I fix that? But for other people, like all these things don't really register. It's more like they see it on a much more intuitive level. Like, what's the story you're trying to tell, whether it reads or not? And then that's something I know I have to go back and fix because that's what I'm trying to communicate here.
Your answer was really like, oh, silly muggles. That's how we do it. No, the non-artist people are always great for, let's see, when I show them the work, can they see the page and understand the story clearly without having a single word or a single line of dialogue on the page? Can the story guide them? Do their eyes flow across the panels clearly? Do they get to the points I want them to get to? Do they understand that? So that feedback is important, because if anyone, if anyone can get it, then you've done it. You've achieved that level of like, you've become commensurate in showing visual storytelling without having to tell people what it is. And that's an integral rule. Show, don't tell. No matter what it is, show, don't tell.
Really strong words to end this with. I think that was the last. Oh, we have one more question? Okay.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your insights. One question that always that's in my mind is, how can we choose which mode of design or mode of art to show your purpose, or to make your purpose come out to life? Like someone without a degree in design, so contemplating which path to take. Like my purpose in life would be to work in the be in the education space and impact it through design. But there are multiple ways to go about it in the space, digital, print. So how can, what would your advice be on how we can navigate that? And also, how do we get over a blank canvas? The first, what would your tips be on that?
Okay. So I'm still trying to figure out how to get over a blank canvas. I won't lie. I've gone about either two routes. Either you get started and then scrap whatever, and then go with the second draft or iteration, because the first one's always not going to be your best. Can you remind me what your first question was?
The first one is how do we navigate which field of art or design to take forward when you have like a purpose in mind, but then there's several routes to it. So how do you choose which one to go first with?
I would say you won't know until you try. There's no way to know which one's going to work for you until you sort of learn more about each one, see which one works for you, works with what you're trying to show. Yeah, you won't know until you try.
Well, I have a solution for your blank canvas, as I've done this solution multiple times. Grab a pencil, just draw a line on it. Seriously, don't even think about it, just do one massive line. That's it, it's done. It's no longer blank. And that helps you start. No, it actually does, it is hugely effective.
This is very effective, yes.
Yeah, it is just hugely effective. Because it's no longer precious. You've scarred it. Now it's time to, I don't know, depending on how deep the graphite is, it's like I need a lot of erasers to remove this. As for purpose, it's, what is your favorite mode of communication? Do you want to communicate in images? Do you want to communicate in words? Do you want to communicate in images and words? It's these decisions. I mean, coming from me, listen, for the longest time in my life, I loved comics and I wanted to be an animator. Before I'm like, no, I like comics now. You know, I loved comics for years. And I still wanted to be an animator before someone pointed out that I love comics. But it's that decision making. Like, what do you like to show and how do you like to communicate?
About the single line on a piece of paper, it's an amazing piece of advice. I think it's with any creative person, and even not a creative person, anyone who in whatever field, sometimes you just go through, I don't know what the word is, a blank slate, or you just can't think.
A block?
A block, yes, thank you. Just an artist block, and I think those ones, you have to tell yourself that it's okay, because sometimes for a lot of creatives or anyone in any other field, you go to a creative block and you start to question yourself, and it becomes worse and worse and worse. I can't do this, I can't draw, and then it just keeps going and going again, and it just doesn't stop. And it's going to be totally fine. It happens to everyone, and sometimes you just let it ride out. And sometimes I used to freak out, and now I let it ride out. But I realized just sometimes putting a piece of paper down and doodle, like doodle nothing. When you doodle or a piece of a line, it's your subconscious. Just you're not even thinking about it. You just do, and whatever comes from that could be something, or it could be nothing. But at least you're moving in some way. You're creating something. So that's always, I think, something to do. Don't worry about that. And I guess to answer your first question, I think we already answered it in a lot of ways. I think you just have to figure out what you're good at, what you want to do, and you can also use different modes. I'm not sure, if you're going into a specific field, you can use, pencil, ink, make it into a digital afterwards. But I think creativity and that kind of stuff will always kind of play a bigger role. But it can also play, and come out in different ways, whether through its, pencil, ink, photography, painting, digital design. These are all things that I think you shouldn't think of as completely separate. They all kind of come together in some way.
Hold on, there's a correlation you've made here. That look, you don't have to be good at it. He said, fix something you're good at. You don't have to be good at it. If it's the way you want to communicate, again, you can do it my way, which is crazy, but just work on it. If it's the way you want to communicate and you feel strongly, this is what makes you happy, it's the way that you communicate. You're not good at it, do it again and again. After the 10,000th image, you'll be a master. Seriously. It's just about iteration.
There's also, in a world where there's AI and anything can be imitated or copied, whatever you do will definitely be unique than something that can be generated from the masses, right? So I think you should embrace the fact that it's labeled imperfect, because that's truly the only thing that makes it valuable in 2023. And with that, I think that was the last question we could take, but I would hope that everyone or whoever's interested could join us in the library afterwards. We have some items that are specific to our practices that could be interesting or enriching to look at. The library is easily recognizable once you're out. It's the room with all the books. And we look forward to maybe continuing some conversations in a more casual setting over there. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you to our speakers.
Thank you for joining us today. We have several upcoming events that we would like we would like to see you at. This weekend on Saturday, 25th, there will be an adult sketching workshop that takes you through the museums under the guidance of artist Rania Jeshi. On March 2nd, the museum is excited to be a part of Art Dubai program with a talk on contemporary tradition featuring speakers Tayammou Nasri, Noor Al-Haj and Saeed. This talk will be moderated by Louisia McMill. If you are interested in following our screening program, our next film screening will take place on March 17th and will be featured the 2 UAE-focused artists' films themed on the sea. To register for any of these upcoming events or to stay aware of our future programs, you will find a QR code near the exit where you can reserve seats and follow us online for future announcement. Thank you again for coming. We hope to see you soon. Shukran.